I think this takes us to the finishing order. So real quick, if you're tuned in on YouTube, go ahead and give us a like and a subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment on who you think had the best race. But let's go through it.
All right. Well, I just said a lot of good stuff about Plo. I don't know if there's anything to add.
No, I think we can. I think it's the result kind of speaks for itself.
Okay, and Power finishes 1.1 seconds behind. Was really the only guy that really had anything for Plo. So I'd say Plo was in a class of his own with Power right there, and then the rest of the field was a little tighter. I mean, Rosenquist ends up with a strong drive, especially late, to pull it up onto the podium after starting ninth, ends up third.
Yeah. So like I said, I mean, I was really impressed with Rosenquist in this race, and I was really impressed with him at Indianapolis. So it's like to see what he can do at Road America. And Power, he made that alternative strategy work very well. And I guess so did Rosenquist. Uh, both those guys, excellent races from both of them.
Then Dixon's in fourth. He started fourth, but it was far from a quiet race. I mean, little contact here and there, close quarters, jockey positions. I mean, he got bounced off the wall at the exit of turn 4 at the beginning of the race. I think it happened again late. There was a lot of contact, but the car looked pretty clean. And he kept his cool and, brought it forth.
Yeah. Yep. It's a great drive. Rossi comes home fifth, which is also a really nice drive. That's 8 spots ahead of where he started. Like Rosenquist, he started on the primaries and was passing people on the opening stint, and I think had moved all the way up to 8th when this 2-stop window opened on lap 24, stretched it to lap 35, which allowed him to overcut all the way up to 5th, and he basically stayed in the mix for top 5 from there on out.
Yeah, and then Kyle Kirkwood, really an amazing race after, dropping to dead last after the first lap, changing his wing. I said earlier, he looked fast and he just didn't look like he was, taking a lot of risk. He just sort of bided his time. But when he had clear track, man, he hammered it. He had the fastest lap of the race. And with that late overcut, got a lot of spots and salvaged 6th place.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was really quite remarkable, the overcut in the second stop, but the whole race was really good to
Yeah.
you know.
Those late restarts, he's right behind all those guys that are really tangled up. And if you watch the camera, he's right there. He's trying to look for a gap. He doesn't just chuck it in there, because there's no room. But man, he was poised. If anybody had drifted out of the way or he was ready to launch and take a few more spots, he stayed, he ended up staying in 6th for all those restarts, but he was poised and, there's more coming from him too. He's looking really good these days.
Yep.
Scott McLaughlin. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's a tough race for Scott McLaughlin. I think it always sucks to start on the front row and then wind up going backwards. But he spent pretty much the entire first stint in 3rd. He had a pretty tough first stop. I think he was undercut by Dixon, overcut by Rossi and Rosenquist. So he comes out 6th for the second stint. Pretty much spends the entire stint there. And then during the second stop window, we saw that replay of him getting clipped by Grosjean and going into anti-stall. And so he winds up, I don't know if that's exactly what did it or what, but after everything cycles through, he blends out into 12th and then actually has a pretty good series of restarts and green flag laps towards the end of this thing to recover back up to 7th.
I think that is what did it. I looked at his lap times, and that lap where he got pinched at turn 1, he lost over 8 seconds. So I'm not sure where they all went by him, I guess between turn 1 and turn 2 and maybe the exit of turn 2. But yeah, that cost him big time. And then, he made a lot of spots at the end. Was strong at the end, but yeah, that set him back a little bit. Marcus Armstrong had a great race, finishes 8th after starting 11th, was right there with his teammates, wheel to wheel a bunch and dicing it up with a lot of the big hitters. So really good showing for Armstrong.
Yeah. and Ericsson right behind him in ninth. But he must have just shredded his green tires on the first stint because he has to go to 3 stops on lap 16. But, I think it helped him a little bit getting to make his second stop under yellow. And actually, in hindsight, I went back and counted, and if they had, I don't know if it would have helped him or not, but if they had elected not to pit under that yellow and just hope for a lot more yellows to the end of the race, they would have been able to do it on 2 stops despite making their first on lap 16. He needed 16 laps of yellow to do the rest of the race on 2 stops, which they ultimately get. And I think there's enough between, I think there's enough where he would have been able, like, he would have pitted on the early side of the second stop, but then been able to make up fuel with all those yellows right at the end. Um, there's no way in hell you can predict that, but it is kind of interesting that theoretically he probably could have made one less pit stop in this race. Um, had they known that there were like 5 or 6 yellows coming later on.
Yeah, I think that's a tough call to make, though, especially when you're in a points battle, right? Because if it doesn't happen, all of a sudden you drop about 10 or 15 spots and there go a lot of your points. So I guess it's a little conservative. He ends up eighth, though. And I'm sorry, conservative, he ends up ninth, but he is second overall in the standings. So, you know, you don't want to roll the dice too much when you're a title contender like that. Newgarden's in 10th. He did that really long first stint on the green tires, which I think was going to set him up well, but he had a really slow first stop. And so he was overcut and came back out sort of mired in a pack that he had to dice it up with all day. And just, couldn't get out of that area.
Yeah, he actually restarted 7th too on the final restart, and got shuffled back to 10th on that short little green flag run to the end. But, you know, he was he
Yeah.
he found himself in a lot of, quite a bit of action during this race. I think it was pretty eventful for him, which coming off the Indy 500 win hangover, it's probably not what you want, right? But yeah, I think actually to hang on to 10th is pretty strong result, all things considered.
And then Colton Herta ends up 11th after starting 24th. Also had a busy race, came in, got off his greens right off the bat. Had a little wing damage and, was these guys were, he was in a group with like Canapino. Well, there was just a lot of hard driving everywhere, but he brings it home at 11th. I don't know if you have anything.
No, but DeFrancesco comes home right behind him, and these guys were essentially on the same strategy from lap 4 onwards when they both topped up under that first yellow. So for DeFrancesco, who has sometimes struggled to keep up with his teammates, I think to come home right behind Herta, be on the same strategy all day is a good result for him.
I think he looked really good all day. I think coming in from 15th or wherever they came in early to get off the greens in hindsight was probably a little bit of a mistake, but he ends up with a 12th place finish ahead of Pagano, who he basically did battle with all day.
Yeah.
Was able to stay ahead of Pagano. So yeah, I think that's a solid race for DeFrancesco. Pagano in 13th after starting 8th, probably a little disappointed. Tires got, I think we talked about it earlier that I think he must have had some tire wear or some kind of degradation on the first stint that forced his hand to come in really early and didn't recover from it. So he's able to salvage a 2-stopper, but
yeah, he did. He probably would have been forced into a 3 if he didn't get those yellow flag laps, but stayed out when all the other 3 stoppers came in under the yellow on lap 43.
Yeah, he does that 41 lap stint in the middle of the race.
Yeah.
Back on track. Okay.
So Canapino, 14th, really good race from him. He started off hot, started from 20th and moved up to 17th. Had some guys ahead of him go to 3 stops, which I think helped him out. And so at the end of the first stint, that established him around 12th, 13th, 14th, where he basically spent the entire day.
Yeah, he was able to drive hard in close quarters and, mind his own business while doing it. And I think that penalty was a little harsh. I don't think he earned the penalty, but either way, I don't think it would have made much of a difference, if any. And yeah, he brings it home 14th. Great race.
So Daly finishes 15th, which is exactly where he started. He went to 3 stops on lap 17. It's hard to say if that worked for him or hurt him in the end because he winds up exactly where he started.
I think if he would have gotten, depending on the timing of the yellows, it could have paid off. In other words, if that first round of stops doesn't get done under green, we go to yellow first, then he can roll right up toward the front of the pack. So it didn't really work that way, but I think it was a good move to give it a try. And, like you said, 15th from starting 15th. Lundgaard starts 16th, or Lundgaard finishes 16th. Also opted for the 3 stopper.
Yep. Wound up in the runoff at one point in this race.
Yeah, I think he probably, if things would have gone more his way, I think he had the pace probably to be a little further up the order, but probably not much. After starting back in 18th. Jack Harvey ends up in 17th after starting 25th. Didn't show a lot of pace, wasn't in there muscling around, knocking people out of the way or anything, but keeps it in one piece, stays on the lead lap, finishes it within a second of his teammate Lundgaard. So, and he finishes ahead of Rinus VK in 18th.
Yeah, and if you want to put a positive spin on it, he 17th for Harvey is 8 spots ahead of where he started, which I think ties him for the second biggest mover with Rossi, who also moved up 8 spots. The only person that moved up further was Herta, who moved up 13 ahead of where he started. But then, yeah, you mentioned VK in 18th. I think he had a really good race going. He had a rough final restart. He dropped from 12th all the way back to where he finished with, which was 18th.
Yeah, I never saw what happened there. No idea. Never found a replay. But yeah, he had restarted in 12th. He did look good for a lot of this race. Just didn't get the result. But Helio comes in 19th. Just was sort of mired at the back all day long, opted for the 3 stopper. Nothing seemed to work for him and ends up in 19th.
Yeah,
Last
I hate to say it, but I think they were kind of grasping at straws in this race because, he I think was the first one to go off strategy and go for 3 stops, probably just to try something different because they weren't happy with their pace, and was pretty much right towards the back for most of it. And so he actually technically does he technically does a 5 stopper, but I think a lot of that is just due to the fact that he was the back of the lead lap anyways, so they kept calling him in under yellow for a little bit more fuel.
So then 3 laps down, Peterson, Ferrucci, and Stingray Robb. I think Peterson and Stingray both came in early to get off greens, and when they did that, they got themselves lapped. So they were sort of on their own back there. Santino was a little further up the order, but then right before the yellow came out, he was in the middle of it with O'Ward. He had lost, it looked like about 5 spots on track, and I don't know how much actual distance around the track, but all of a sudden he found himself right there in front of the leader, trying to stay on the lead lap. And when the thing happened with O'Ward, Santino lost the lead lap and then was unable to get it back, had an incident, fell back to the 21st, 3 laps down.
Yeah, and then everybody after this had contact. Malukas, Grosjean, Rahal, O'Ward, and Ilott.
Yeah. So there you have it. I think that's going to wrap it up.
Yeah, not the first race ever on the streets of Detroit, but the first time in a long time and on a brand new layout for the streets of downtown itself.
Let's go through some of the points real quick.
Okay, so yeah, I'm looking at it now.